David and John, I was at a briefing on Friday with a senior Israeli official arguing that they needed to go into Lebanon, needed to destroy the command and control of Hezbollah. This was immediately after the strike. They did not yet know whether Nasrallah had been killed, but they pretty much thought he had been and that they were waiting proof of that. But they argued that there were weapons in tunnels in southern Lebanon along the Israeli border, and that unless they destroyed those tunnels, that there were weapons in homes and rockets and military equipment, all pre-positioned for an attack similar to the October 7th attack. The description, David, by that Israeli official was that that Sinwar, the Hamas terror leader, was still alive in Gaza, had jumped the gun, and that this was a long-range plan by Iran through its proxies to encircle Israel and eliminate Israel by 2040. And that the next step was going to be a surprise attack by Hezbollah, and that they had good intelligence of this. David, we don't know if that intelligence is matched by the American intelligence, but that is clearly the motivation for Israel going in, or saying they're going in. They were under huge political pressure to get there. 65,000, 70,000 Israeli citizens who've been evacuated from their homes in northern Israel since last October 8th, when Hezbollah started firing in support of Hamas after the massacre. And so they're determined to root out these weapons and go into these tunnels. And that means from the air, they said, but Gallant said yesterday, from the air, from the ground, the air, and the sea.
Yeah, you're seeing a very aggressive Israeli response, and now Iran is trying to strike back. And for the Iranian regime, this is a major threat to them. Losing the leader of Hezbollah was an enormous blow to their decades-old strategy of using proxies. And this is a sort of an epic moment right now. Can Israel's defenses, the Iron Dome, can Israeli jets and American jets down whatever Iran has fired? There are ballistic missiles that take only 12 minutes from launch in Iran to hit Tel Aviv. In the attack in April, there were waves of drones. Those were shot down very quickly. So what's happening right now in Israel is just critical in terms of what new direction this war takes.
And, John Brennan, this time we don't know that the Jordanians and other allies, the Europeans as well, will be assisting in the air defense, because there has been so much dismay in the region against Israel's going into Lebanon.
Well, I think certainly our European partners, especially the Brits and some others, will do what they can to prevent any type of loss of life inside of Israel as a result of Iranian ballistic missile attacks. Again, the Jordanians, may be a question because, again, after looking at what has happened in Lebanon and so many Palestinians and Lebanese who have died because of Israeli strikes, the Jordanians might be a little bit more reluctant, but at the same time, the Jordanians have been good partners to the United States and certainly do not want a regional conflict and wide-scale war, because it could, in fact, envelop them and seriously threaten their national security interests as well. So I would like to think that the players in the region, as well as supporters, will do what they can to try to prevent this from just spiraling out of control. But again, as we watch what is happening over Israel, and if we see some explosions there, to me that augurs ominously for an escalation, because I think Israel will want to lash back at Iran, and could be in a major way.
And as you can see over the night skies over Tel Aviv and Jerusalem on your screen, it is almost 8 p.m. in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. They're 7 hours ahead of the east coast of the United States. School children were in school earlier today, but there is a school holiday starting tomorrow, leading up to the New Year's holiday, which starts at sundown on Wednesday. So starting tomorrow, schools are closed through Sunday. So children will be home. They'll be near their shelters. Right now, what is happening in Israel is people going into their shelters. Every building there has shelters, all the hotels. David, whenever we go to Israel on any of these trips, and I've gone to so many with the Secretary of State, as he's been trying 10 trips, he has tried to negotiate a ceasefire in Gaza. And one of the biggest reasons was that all of the Iranian proxies had observed the ceasefire that did exist last November and for a few days in Gaza. So the hope was that Hezbollah would observe another ceasefire. Then they tried for a ceasefire in Lebanon, thinking that they could switch the sequencing, but clearly they have failed at all of these diplomatic efforts. Matt Bradley and Erin McLaughlin, are my thanks to you. We're hoping that Erin is down in the shelter. But coming up next, Ben Rhodes is joining us as well, the former Deputy National Security Advisor. Ben, you're with John Brennan, and David Rhodes here is with me. This is what the U.S. feared when they said to Netanyahu, for all of his reasons to go in against Hezbollah, they said, that's not the best way to get your people back into their homes. You don't escalate to de-escalate. And obviously now, right with the Iranian retaliation, Israelis are in their shelters as they go into the New Year's holiday weekend. Ben?
Yeah, I think, since October 7th, the Biden administration has had a number of goals. One was obviously to provide support to Israel as it aimed to go after Hamas. But then also one of the principal goals of U.S. diplomacy since October 7th had been avoiding the escalation into Lebanon, precisely because I think there was an understanding that Lebanon could be kind of the tripwire to this broader regional war, that essentially, it's one thing if there's a conflict in Gaza that alone is destabilizing enough and has obviously brought a tremendous human toll and has grinded on here for a full year. But I think the concern has always been that if Israel launched a ground operation and significantly escalated things in Lebanon, that could draw Iran into a conflict in a direct way, as we're seeing tonight, and that then Israel might be compelled to respond against Iran, and then suddenly the kind of whole region could light up because you're dealing with Lebanon, where there could be internal conflicts and obviously a longer-term Israeli presence. You're dealing with proxy forces like the Houthis in Yemen. Iraq is a place that the U.S. always watches carefully for potential escalation. We have obviously enormous diplomatic presence and some troops there. And so the concern has always been that if the whole region kind of catches the fire that has been burning in Gaza and kind of in northern Israel and southern Lebanon, we could see what we're seeing now. And again, I'm struck by the fact that these are ballistic missiles. The last Iranian attack on Israel, felt almost calibrated with drones and with other longer, missiles that took longer to reach their targets to kind of send a message without trying to escalate things. This feels, like the kind of thing that is going to compel an Israeli response at the same time that they're in Lebanon. This is what the administration, I think, had been seeking to avoid for the last year.
And David Rose, when we talk about the region, the Shia militias in Iraq are of great threat to U.S. forces there. The Iraqis, under pressure from Iran, were demanding the exit of all U.S. forces. That hasn't taken place yet, but they've been drawing down.
This is just a pivotal moment, I think, for the Biden administration. One of their goals, they've told some of our colleagues on NBC, is to try to prevent this kind of regional war from erupting in the Middle East between now and November 5th, to show that the Biden-Harris administration can deliver stability. And so the killing of the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, which I think shocked many people, the success of the Israeli airstrikes. In addition to killing him, they killed multiple other leaders. They've taken out large arms depots. That compelled Iran to respond as they're doing right now. And it's what Ben said. How does Israel respond to this? If one missile gets through, or two, and dozens of Israeli civilians are killed in these attacks that are happening right now, there'll be tremendous pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu to then retaliate against Iran. So again, this is a grave moment, a historic moment. We just have to see how events play out.
And Ben Rhodes, to follow up on that, you've been in the White House in these kinds of circumstances, difficult circumstances, during your 8 years in the Obama administration. This is exactly what the administration did not want to happen 5 weeks from an election. Doesn't that, that opens up all kinds of issues as we see the lack of stability in the Middle East.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are multiple concerns. Obviously, the initial concern is the safety of the people that are under bombardment now in Israel. Also, the kind of risk of kind of scenes of chaos and violence and further loss of life in Lebanon, and the ways in which this could escalate. And just to bring other concerns into it, the Middle East kind of erupts in chaos. Well, that drives up energy prices as well, something that has obviously already, been a grave concern to the American electorate. And there are all these other wild cards too, Andrea. I mean, just looking out, several weeks, what happens with the Iranian nuclear program, right, which is now no longer under any international monitoring or verification. As Iran has kind of lost some of the capability that they saw in Hezbollah and Lebanon, do they feel like they need to make a move in the direction of pursuing a nuclear weapon? What happens to kind of the stability of governments like Jordan that have been under a lot of pressure from their own domestic populations? And so anytime you war gamed this, without getting into too much detail in the White House, there really is a chain reaction that can get set off here. And Lebanon often is a part of the Middle East where those kind of chain reactions can get set off because there are so many different parties that have interests there, that are active there. It's not kind of contained in the same way that Gaza is, because it brings in these Iranian interests, brings in different kind of regional sentiment. And so, again, I think we are watching that scenario that has the potential to be, above all, tragic for the people kind of in the crossfire in the Middle East. But yes, you're right. In terms of the political calendar, for there to be a escalating war in the Middle East in October is certainly not, anything that. I mean, I'd like to separate these issues from politics, but inevitably it enters into our politics, and I think Donald Trump will say, "Look, there's chaos, and I'll end the chaos." And kind of his strongman message will be his answer to this. And here, the best politics for Biden-Harris administration is better policy outcomes, and I'm sure that's what they'll be working towards and frantically in the days ahead.